Yeah.
And even then, I never said I want to be exempt from using this camera. I just said, as far as homework is concerned, I want to be able to use a digital video camera. In class, I'll still be happy to try to do it, but I know that I suck at it, so don't expect too much from me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not asking you to be treated much differently. Just a slight tweak. But no, they couldn't do that. So I spent the next 2 years fighting. That was literally from 2007 to 2010 I spent fighting.
Yeah.
And in and in 2009, after we had that first successful year of Burlington College Presents and we had the LD show, again I came back, and you can jump in at any point with anything that you may remember on this stuff. But I came back and we were doing the stuff, and the atmosphere was incredibly tense.
Yeah.
We literally got to the point where we had to be doing, and I'm going to do this visually for you, and I'm going to have to narrate it because this is a podcast. We had to be looking over our shoulders right and left in fear to see who was coming because we couldn't trust students. We couldn't trust teachers because everybody was the enemy. These were people that would rat you out quicker than you could say Fort Ticonderoga. Why? Why for students? Because of money. They were paying off students by getting them jobs, by giving them modeling contracts, by displaying their films at an international film festival. By doing that stuff, they were paying off the students to turn and rat out the next person over from them that may say something anti-establishment. And that was the reason, you'll recall, that Burlington College Presents was shut down. Though not officially given, that was the reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, and crazy bitch. But anyhow, um, no, I say that because you know, guidelines are there for a reason. Okay, and Jane said point. She said point blank. I said, well, there are guidelines put out there by the, you know, by NEASC, by the United States Department of Education, by the Vermont Department of Education, and she said point blank, those are just suggestions.
Yep.
Now she's paying off these students, which I'm pretty sure, sanctions could come against her. I mean, granted, there's no athletics there, so, there's no NCAA sanctions, but still there's NEASC sanctions.
Right. Right. Well, that and there's the ethics committees and stuff that could go after her as well. But paying off students, encouraging people to rat out their neighbors, for simply asking for what is considered legally, when the system is working, to be okay.
Yeah.
Which gets into something else that I should add. Is at this time I was taking a law course called Law and Disability Law in Higher Education. And in this course I was learning a lot about how stuff worked.
Yeah.
And while I was learning that stuff, one of the things that came out of it was a certain amount of uh, uh, information about the disabilities being violated at the college level in similar situations. And I said, I think I need to talk to a civil rights lawyer, to my parents. And my parents said, well, we can't afford to talk to a civil rights lawyer because that's thousands upon thousands of dollars. And my dad, rather stupidly,
Yeah.
told me that I could find a lawyer that would work pro bono, a civil rights lawyer that would work pro bono. Let me tell you here and now, there's no such thing. So nobody go looking for a civil rights lawyer that will work pro bono. There is no such thing. There may be certain amounts of lawyers that allegedly do pro bono work, but none of them are civil rights lawyers. Let's be perfectly clear about that. So I wound up having to look for that stuff. And while I was looking, I came across an article that said, and if your civil rights are violated, contact the Office for Civil Rights. And there's two chapters. There's one in Washington, D.C., and there's one in Boston, Massachusetts that you can contact. So my mom called the one in Washington, D.C. and said, look, I'm doing some investigative work for my son, and he's having these kind of problems up at his college in Burlington, Vermont. And the woman spent an hour and a half with her on the phone. An hour and a half. And listened to the problems I was having and the nasty things that Art Hessler was saying to me, like, you know, we're not going to dump down our curriculum for you, and stuff like that. And, technically by law, we don't have to do any of this stuff. And she just was the whole time, holy hell, how in the hell can they be doing this stuff? This is somebody who's in charge of implementing the law, and she's working in D.C., probably the worst place for hot air bullshit. And she's saying that this is even worse than the bullshit that's flying around Washington. That's pretty bad. Now, she goes on to say that we should contact the Boston chapter of the Office for Civil Rights. So we did. We contacted the Boston office. And they said, well, fill out the form and we'll contact you. Because we're not going to talk to you before that. So, okay. So we filled out a form, and they said, list your complaints. And I said, and they gave literally like a paragraph's worth of space. I said, there's not enough room to see attached on the form. And I documented everything for a good 3 months of that year. Going back as far as I could because they said everything that's relevant. And so I gave everything that was relevant in detail. Beating my brains out to do it. And I listed everything up until about February of that year. And this is February 2010, just so everybody's clear. And so I went and I sent this off. And from February until May, I fought the Office for Civil Rights, as well as Burlington College, as well as my dad, about the laws pertaining to the situation because my dad at the time, they were trying to get me kicked out of housing the year before, and he was going, "What's the big deal? Sign a piece of paper. It's not going to be anything." Well, guess who turned out to be right on that one? Me. I turned out to be right. Don't sign the paper. It's going to fuck you over. Guess who turned out to be right? Me. You know, and I can't hold that against him because he's ignorant. He didn't know. He wasn't educated. Oh, that was something else. Glad I reminded myself. Office for Civil Rights, right? You have to give a reason why you didn't file before you filed. You know what I gave? I didn't know you guys existed. Had I known, I would have filed sooner. Perfectly legit reason, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know something's in existence, how are you gonna file? You know what they said to me? That's not a good reason. That's not a good reason for you not to file. Really, I think it's a great reason. And I said to them, really? Well, you know, how is that not a good reason? If I had known, I would have filed sooner. I said, well, that's no excuse for not knowing. I said, look, I'm sorry I didn't have a chip implanted in my brain when I was a fetus that told me if you ever have your civil rights violated, you go to the Office for Civil Rights, okay? They failed to see the humor in that. But they did say, you know, that's no excuse. And I said, I think it's a perfectly good excuse. And they said, well, it's not. So that's not a good excuse. You're not really eligible. But since you're here, let's hear the rest of these charges. So I'm getting verbally abused by the school that I'm paying to go to. And I'm being verbally abused by the people that are supposed to enforce my civil rights and protect them. Now, on top of that, I also find out through this process that people can counterfile against the person that filed against them for filing against them. And then you would be investigated by the people who would be filing against you for filing against them.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that kind of a way of promoting retaliation? They say retaliation's against the law, but then they give a legalized version of retaliation. The system's broken, people. I'm going to allow myself one F word in this and tell you who the Office for Civil Rights and tell you the president of the former president of Burlington College, Jane Sanders, fuck you, the system is broken. That does not excuse what Jane did. That does not excuse what Sarah Mill did, which was uphold Jane's orders, despite knowing that they were wrong. That does not excuse Barry Snyder or anybody else from what they did.
Right.
What they did was wrong. But I say this, the system is broken. I found that out firsthand. I cannot recommend in good conscience to anybody to go and file with the Office for Civil Rights. The system is broken. Your civil rights are bullshit. They're not going to be protected. They're not going to be upheld. So you know what? It's you against the world. I hate to say it, but that's what it is. You against the world. I found that out firsthand, so the sooner you find that out, the better. I'm saying right now stuff that I could probably get killed by the government for saying, and I could probably get killed by former teachers that I had, and the head of the high school I went to, because he doesn't want it leaked out that this is the truth. People don't give a flying, you know what, about you. People don't